fix that. All right, I would like to call to order this meeting of the regular board meeting of North County Transit District for March 21, 2019. Anthony, please call the roll.
Yes, sir. Jack Feller. Here. Tony Krantz.
Here.
John Franklin. Here. Paul McNamara. Here. Jim Desmond. Here. Dave Drucker. Here. Jewel Edson. Here. Sharon Jenkins. Here. Priya Bhat Patel.
Okay, thank you. And if you'd all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and we'll now hear a safety briefing from the clerk.
Yes, sir. In the event of emergency, I'll dial 911. In the event of an evacuation, please exit using the stairs. Do not use the elevators. Once outside, please do not re-enter unless told to do so by emergency personnel. We have fire extinguishers on each floor of this building and a portable defibrillator on the first floor. We also have staff on hand trained in CPR procedures. That concludes my safety brief, sir.
Thank you. Anthony, are there any changes to the agenda?
No, sir.
All right. Public speakers for oral communication, non-agenda related items. We have two, and I would like to start with Edwin Peters.
Is the mic hot?
It is.
Okay, if nobody can hear me, let me know and I'll speak up a little louder. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you. I'm Edwin Peters, a longtime resident of North County. I live in Oceanside. I love our city, and I'm a transit pass holder, a compass card holder. I love it. I do. And generally speaking, I feel extremely safe on board public transportation. However, last Sunday past, I was returning westbound on the Sprinter. The eastbound Sprinter went out of service, had to wait half an hour, no problem. Walked my little dog Jada, sweet little Maltese, had a great little walk, came back, got on the train, headed back west, got to about, I think it was Palomar College. And I was sitting in the priority seating area. You know, guys know about that, right? For old folks like me. And there was two bikes across from me, gentleman, me, another gentleman, three of us, older, two younger guys standing up there. This guy comes on with a bike and he walks up to me and says, "You're going to have to move." Sir, can you see the sign? Priority seating there, federal law requires, blah, blah. You know what it says? I don't think so. There was no Bombardier ticket checker, or what do you call the correct term? What is it? Ticket checker? Nothing. I looked, it was a single train. I looked both directions. I go, whoa. Because on the website, I read it thoroughly today. It says your safety and security is insured 24/7 every day of the year. Now the cameras are right above me. So I'm assuming there's a record of this event. I was wearing this hat, pretty easy to spot. Please check the video if you have that capability. Tell me what you think. But this guy walked up, he put his bike over, and he took his fist, he reared up and said, "Ah! Holy sh!" I thought I was going to get pegged right there. You know, my fighting days are way behind me, board members. I'm 68. You know, my little dog is looking. Jeez. I don't like that. I choose public transportation not because to save money, not because it helps the environment. I save it because it's safe. That's why. Safety is number one priority. And I'm speaking of safety in terms of physics. Okay, time's up.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I'm sorry for your experience.
I am too.
We're going to have Eric Rowe get in touch with you, and he'll be sure to follow up.
Extremely traumatic and disturbing.
Yep. Well, thanks for bringing it to our attention.
It scared me. That was bad.
All right, the second speaker
Oral communication is Joan Brown, please.
Good afternoon, Board. Anyone who's been on a bus in the last 6 months, raise your hands. Oh, that's nice. Very good. I'm talking today about the bus closures because I did not know about the meeting about that last month, or I would have been here, trust me. But I would think that that's one of the least important things that need to be done, because I take about 6 buses in the city. 309, 303, 302, 101, 323, 325, 318, 315, and then others sometimes, and plus a Sprinter. And some of the bus stops have no sidewalks. Some have buses that are only, bus benches that are only not even a foot away from the curb, which scares me, especially on Santa Fe. And I'd love to take notes, but I can't read them. And I feel that something that slows down is most people exit out of the front door. And I realize that part of the bus goes down, and a lot of people take that because of that. But most of the time, people go out the front door. Very seldom. In fact, you have to remind the bus driver to open the back door for you. And I figure when you have 2 wheelchairs getting on that bus, that takes some time. And sometimes people are getting off, so they have to wait for that, and then people can't get on until the wheelchairs are done. Sometimes that can take at least 10, if not 15 minutes when there are several bus and wheelchairs, and those walkers. So I would think that the bus stops themselves. Speak of taking one out, you took one, NCT took one out by Albertsons on Vista Way at Beaubier. And I volunteer at the Blind Center now. I used to belong to it, but now I just help them. And we walked up to that bus stop there to go down Vista Way. And the reason we didn't walk all on the Oak is because there were no sidewalks. So we went to the bus stop. There's no bus stop. We didn't know it went out. So in that case, you have to walk across 2 streets and walk half a block down. And so I called right then and there. What happened to your bus stop? Well, they put it in. So they took it out, put it in. And plus, I think $10,000 for your stops, for your bus huts, for what you get, those pressed metal ones, I think a little expensive because it doesn't stop the wind and all that. But that's my opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. All right. First item is the regular minutes for February 21, 2019. Do I have a motion to approve? Motion by Board Member Edson, seconded by Bob Patel. And we've got our little voting indicators. Are we ready for that? Yes, we are.
On the minutes, okay. I hit 1. Okay.
On the motion of Board Member Joel Edson, second by Board Member Priya Patel to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting held on February 21st, 2019. Motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Okay, thank you. And now we have consent items 1 through 9. And
I would like to pull items 4 and 6.
4 and 6.
And I have a request on item 1.
Okay. Your request?
What do you want to know? Well, I guess on item 1, the monthly transit operation performance report. I want to say thank you very much for the report. It's got a lot of good information. But the look back is only 1 month, or I guess 1 year. I'm sorry, 1 year. I'm wondering, if we can get like there's a page, I don't know, page 1 of 1. There's a system-wide ridership number that we're given with 795,000 people in the month of January of 2019. Can we get like a chart that has like a 10-year look back that just shows, okay, what's the ridership has been? Because I hear transit ridership's going up, I hear it's going down. I just would like to see something to justify that either way. So could we get that?
Yeah, so just to be clear, so we produced this monthly report just to give you an update, and it's intended just to be a quick snapshot. Then we have a report that's a quarterly report that goes into more detail, because that captures more things that we can talk about from a trend point of view. Are you asking for us just to give a one-time presentation?
I'd like it to be in every time you give us an update. So I'd like to see the last 10-year trend, I guess, is what I'd like to see.
Oh, okay.
So I don't care if you put it in the quarterly or in the monthly, but if we can get an update, just so that I'm just looking for a longer-term trend.
We'll put it in the quarterly report presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that means we have items 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 8, and 9 that haven't been pulled, and I would
Second,
second.
I second.
All right, so we have a motion by Drucker and a second by Edson for items 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 8, and 9.
Push the green thumb, it worked.
There it goes.
On the motion of Board Member Dave Drucker, seconded by Board Member Joel Edson to approve consent items 1 through 9 with the exception of items 4 and 6. Motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Okay, items 4 and 6. Do you need a staff report on those?
No, I just had a couple of comments and questions. So basically, I absolutely, to the end?
To the end.
Okay, never mind.
All right, so moving on to item 10, other business item, is monthly intergovernmental affairs report.
Again. Good afternoon, Chair Kranz, board members, Richard Harmon, the Townsend Public Affairs. I'm here to present the Intergovernmental Affairs Report. I'll try to be brief. I wanted to start with a little bit of in the weeds, because this is a time of year in the legislature when a lot of things are happening, but not a lot of things are visible or in hard copy and print. So just to give you an idea of some timelines, February 22nd was the deadline for the legislature to introduce new legislation as part of its normal course of business. I would estimate upwards of 60% or more of bills that were introduced by February 22nd were what we call placeholders. Either they're just intent language, like the legislature intends to do something, or they are non-substantive changes to law that are meant to just kind of hold the place until they decide what they want to do. In addition, I'd say probably more than 60% of those bills were also introduced on like February 21st or February 22nd. And that's important because when a bill is introduced, it has to actually sit for 30 days before it can be amended and referred to a policy committee for discussion and consideration. So literally tomorrow is that day 30 for probably 60+% of the bills when they can finally be amended, referred to committee. So as we move into the presentation, we have on our radar a number of bills, and we put some of the more potentially relevant ones in the presentation. But even some of those bills that we've highlighted are still in kind of a placeholder form. And some authors are very willing to say, hey, this is what I'm going to be doing with it. You'll see this included in the bill, come end of March. Others are more, I don't want to say cagey, but they're still considering sort of what they want language to look at, where they want to go with the bill. So I bring that up again, just because there'll be a couple on here that it's not like we have no clue what they're doing, but on one hand, we kind of have no clue what they might be doing. Committee hearings have started because, again, they could introduce bills as far back as beginning of December when they started the year officially. So they have been doing some committee hearings, but pretty much next week is the kickoff of heavy policy committee rotation And when I come back to you in the next month or two, we will have much more thorough information about the bills that are out there, what's relevant. Rolling into the governor's State of the State address this year, took place in February. I highlighted because we got used to Governor Brown, who liked to talk, pretty lofty goals. Difference with Governor Newsom was, we like to say it was kind of newsworthy because within his State of the State address, he talked about appointments he was making to several key secretarial positions. He talked about appointing certain mayors, as like Mayor Steinberg from Sacramento was appointed to head of homelessness sort of task force for the state. So we actually laid some things out that actually were updates and things that people were looking for. And then I know you've all followed his, comments on high-speed rail, and he talked about cities and meeting, housing requirements and housing goals. He did follow up the State of the State with a meeting with mayors to talk about housing in some of the cities that were non-compliant. What we found with this governor, a couple observations so far. One is, especially when he's in a public place making a speech, like with his budget rollout of the State of the State, he likes to be pretty blunt about what he intends to do or what his policy intends to affect. But then you'll see that his administration back up just a little bit and talk more about, well, this is what he intends. This is the timeline. He talked about tying transportation and housing funds together, which we'll talk about in a minute. But as you get into the details, that's a longer time frame than just this year. Similar with high-speed rail, it sounded from his speech like he was ready to pull the plug on the whole project, where in reality, it's trying to prove the first segment is successful to make the rest viable. The second observation has been that from experience with mayors and other elected officials who have spent time with him in meetings, he's been very engaged. So we had some mayors who participated in his little housing meeting in Long Beach, and they said for an hour and a half, he sat there with his team and he was engaged. He took notes. He listened. He asked follow-up questions when mayors said, hey, this is a challenge we have with housing in our city. He would follow up with questions and try to get at, some of the core problems. And so a lot of the folks I've talked to have come away saying, when you're in one-on-one meetings with them, working through some of these big issues, he's very much engaged, very much about the follow-up, and they've been very impressed with that style. So, positive things, I think, heading into this year. Some of the issues that are relevant for us, I mentioned connection of transportation and housing. Housing is going to be one of the dominant issues again this year. You're going to see from a policy level in the legislature more discussion of how that ties with transportation and particularly with transit. Many of you are familiar with the bill last year, SB 827 from Senator Wiener, that would have changed some rules around transit stops, major transit locations, and what local agencies were required to do or what they could do with housing around that. That's come back. In fact, it's come back this year as SB 50. And in the interim, the Senate actually had a Senate Transportation and Housing Committee was one committee for the last good number of years. Senator Atkins has split that committee. So now there's a standalone transportation and a standalone housing committee. Senator Wiener chairs the Senate Housing Committee, and Senator Bell still chairs the Senate Transportation Committee. So there are a number of bills that have been introduced by members. Some of them, again, are in placeholder form that are talking about the connection of housing and transportation, particularly around transit locations. The final item here, and this is going to impact usually what is some of the more in the weeds legislation around the Transportation Development Act that impacts us. Last August, the chairs of the Senate and Assembly Transportation Committees sent a letter to the California Transit Association and asked them to put together a task force to look at TDA, saying they've had feedback like some of the performance metrics that's used as part of TDA are maybe outdated or need to be revisited, and asked CTA to lead a task force of some of its member agencies in coordination with state agencies and other stakeholders. And over the course of 2019, come up with some reforms or changes that could be implemented in the 2020 legislative year. So I think to date, the task force has met twice, once in February and once in March, to try to lay the framework of what they're going to be looking at this year. And those meetings have, again, involved transit agencies, state officials, members of the legislative committee staff. One of the issues particularly relevant for us, we talked about this at the last couple of meetings, has been fare box recovery ratio. and the impact of some of the cap and trade and other state funding, and how it almost penalizes transit agencies to use that for transit fare subsidies. That's one of the issues that this task force will be looking at this year. So both legislative committees in each house have said, we're probably going to hold off on a lot of in the weeds transit related legislation related to transit fares and other things, pending the outcome of the work of this task force. So with that, we'll move into some of the bills we are looking at already. Let's see. There we go. So I guess this is a good segue, as I just mentioned, transit fares and subsidies. There's a couple bills, so these are actually identical bills so far. Assembly Bill 226 and Assembly Bill 1543 are both bills that basically ask for reduced fare transit fares to be counted as a full adult fare, so that, again, it doesn't look on your recovery ratio as though you're receiving less money or having less ridership. The basic penalization for doing these reduced fares. Mr. Holden has tried for a couple of years to do some work around transit fares. Both of these bills, I would be very surprised to see them move this year. One, because of the work of the TDA task force, but secondly, the Transportation Committee chairs have asked for a study from UCLA that looks at the usage of transit fare subsidies, reduced fare programs, from transit agencies, from cities, counties, colleges, and universities. And they've asked for UCLA to complete that work by this fall, so that anything they do legislatively on this issue, they could take that into account and do something next year. So we'll be watching that, but so far the chairs of the transportation committees have said they won't be considering those bills this year. Ms. Gonzalez-Fletcher has introduced a placeholder bill that would establish a youth transit pass program. I wish I had more information on it. When I spoke to them just a few days ago, they were still developing the final language. It may be a San Diego County only program. They're talking about that as opposed to a statewide program. We should know more. When I talked earlier about legislative timelines, most committees really want to see language last week, because to get into the normal flow of the legislative process, they need to get those bills referred to committee. So over the course of the next few days, we should be seeing most of the bills fleshed out with actual language. Discuss a little bit about access and accommodations. Assembly Bill 1351 by Mr. Lackey, who's out of the Palmdale area, makes changes to the process of approving paratransit riders and visitors. It actually expedites, in his words, the process for the application process for someone to apply for that consideration to a 7-day turnaround. If the application is not approved within 7 days, it's automatically approved. It also allows that person to electronically share that with another transit district anywhere in the state that they may be visiting, and have that be accepted by that other transit agency. The problem the author sees in this is that I think the normal processing time for many of these applications is around 3 weeks. I think they polled a good number of transit agencies, and it sounds like a 3-week process. And I believe the author had some visitors in Sacramento who wished to use their local transit application approval and weren't allowed to when they were traveling. So this will be one that we'll be watching closely, because some of the timelines involved in the application approval process, there's communication back and forth with the applicant. So it's not just a one-sided, you're either approved or denied. There's oftentimes communication, and it's hard to put maybe a 1-week timeline on that. So we'll be watching that. Similarly, Assembly Bill 752, in its current form, requires lactation rooms at all transit stations. In speaking with the author, they're looking to narrow this bill down to apply only to your larger transit center. So it doesn't mean like a bus stop. It means any larger facility. And also they'd like to narrow it down to where if you have enough room in the restrooms to make that accommodation, you'd be required to put it in. Or if you're doing new construction, you'd be required to include that. So again, we haven't seen the final language, but they're attempting to narrow it. There is not funding attached to this. So this would be an unfunded mandate, and that's something we'll talk about in your legislative agenda later on. Senate Bill 397, as it looks right now, here we allow pets. This is a requirement that during an evacuation order, transit districts will be required to allow pets on, pets are defined as cats and dogs on transit vehicles. I think they polled several different transit districts around the state, and there wasn't a consistent policy in terms of how that would be treated under evacuation orders. Assembly Bill 1017 by Ms. Horvath. This would require the PUC to study different forms of safety improvements for pedestrian at-grade crossings in quiet zones. It literally, I think that's the extent of the language in the bill. It says, in addition, when you don't have horns, it says PUC, take a look what other safety improvements could be made to assist with those quiet zone crossings. Senator Dodd has SB 336, which would require transit operators to be on hand for any fully automated transit vehicles in the fleet. We don't have any of these transit vehicles in our fleet, but this would require at least one person. The bill talks a lot about customer interaction, being there in case of an emergency. It sounds counterintuitive to say it's a fully automated transit vehicle, but we're going to require staff to be on board. Funding program and district issues. Assemblymember Todd Gloria is doing Assembly Bill 1413. This basically takes Assembly Bill 805, which was from a couple years ago. There was a requirement in that bill that any projects over $1 million, a project labor agreement would be required to be in place for that project. This extends that to apply statewide. Ms. Horvath also has Assembly Bill 1785, which is a placeholder bill at this point. It's specific to North County Transit District statutes. She's holding this. We've been speaking with her office, and I don't think there's a clear idea of what it may be used for yet, but it's there in case, I guess, an issue arises that's specific to our transit district. SB 277 will be used for the local partnership program. So probably will drop off sort of the monthly reporting we have here. It'll still be something we track, but it'll be focused on the local partnership program, which is used by those cities and counties that have sales tax measures. It's an SB1 program. And SB 498 by Senator Hurtado is still a placeholder bill. It was intended to affect statutes for the TIRCP program. When I spoke to the author's office a couple days ago, they still had no proposal to put in the bill, so we will see if next week they actually have something that moves forward. So this was a snapshot of just over the last couple of weeks, bills that we had identified that may have some relevance. As these bills are amended, other bills are amended, some of these may drop off. There may be a number of others that via their amendments end up on our radar screen that we'll be sharing with you. With that, I'll move into the proposed legislative agenda. This is something we saw at the board retreat. It's also very similar to the previous year's legislative agenda. I think the ones where we actually included something additional was, I think on the second slide here, we talked about, when I talked about transit fare subsidies earlier, the very last one regarding LC top funds used as customer revenue when funds are used to reduce fares. And the cap and trade funding, I'm trying to remember if that was a new one this year, ensure competitiveness. It may not have been. I think that last one was maybe our only new one. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I think the final recommendation here is approval of the report as well as the legislative agenda. But I'd be happy to answer questions on any of the bills, any of the other issues I mentioned.
Yeah, why do we specify the TOD projects that we're going to pursue discretionary grant funding for?
Well, we just identified, if you go back to that slide, okay, so we identified a list of items. It doesn't exclude other things. We just identified some of the projects that are priority projects that we're looking to advance.
Any other questions, comments? Board Member Bob Patel.
Thank you. So I have quite a few questions and comments. So bear with me here. So I appreciate the overview on the different bills that we've been following and definitely on our legislative agenda. One of the things that I would be glad to see is that if we could, as a board at some point, and I'll look to you here, Matt, is providing more direction on how we can effectively lobby or support these bills that moving forward. And at the same time, thinking of how we can be supportive of our jurisdictions. So, working with our jurisdictions to make sure that if they're also lobbying for something similar, that we are having messages coming from two different sources. I think that was something that was brought up during our meeting on Tuesday. And we're also looking at, obviously, housing, transit came up. So I think that would be really essential, is making sure that we have that message coming from multiple sources. So it's actually loud and clear when we're up in Sacramento. So that's number one. I mean, for me, it would be really important, and obviously I'd look to the rest of my board to kind of figure out when we would want to revisit our legislative platform or legislative agenda and try to look to see whether or not, obviously these seem to be great points, but if there's anything else that we need to look at moving forward. And then there were a few bills, before I get into my other couple of questions, that I was wondering if you could provide some feedback on.
I will give you as much information as I have.
Great. I know this one wasn't mentioned, but this one was something that I had a question on, and we're actually going to be following as a city. It's AB 847. So that one is specifically on transportation finance priorities in regards to housing. I know that's more city related, but it would be interesting to kind of know how that would affect NCTD as well. Just because obviously all of us are cities, and if we don't, it would just be nice to kind of keep track of that as well. So yeah. And then AB 176, I don't know if we mentioned that also, but that's the California Alternate Energy and Advanced Transit Finance Authority, and how we're going to utilize taxes. So that's another one. And then AB 1025, which is Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, just for the capital improvements for intercity commuter urban rail systems. So those are the three.
I will actually tell you, AB 1025, Mr. Grayson's on the TIRCP, was on a slide and then met with his office. It's now becoming an education bill on
Gotcha.
STEM education.
Okay,
So,
great.
yes.
Perfect. Thanks for the update on that one. And then really quickly, so I noticed on, I think it was slide 6, we talk about transit-oriented development projects, and I know Chair Kranz already mentioned, we go into the specifics here. We talk about doing development projects in Oceanside, Solana Beach, and Escondido, but then we're leaving out 4 other cities. So I just wanted to know why, and then if those will be included.
So again, that list does not mean we are not going to work on those projects, but I can walk you through specifically why we highlighted those projects.
That would be helpful.
Okay, so from a practical point of view, Solana Beach, because we have been working with the city on a project before you were on the board, we actually went out to bid on a project. Unfortunately, that project didn't pencil out. We are working with the city and hopeful over the next couple of months to be able to come back with a different approach to advancing that transit-oriented project that's underway now. We're actively working with the city towards that. Oceanside is probably the prime piece of real estate that we have in terms of development potential. It supports a multitude of goals that we have as a district. We're proposing, and staff is providing me a scheduled timeline, that we would put that transit-oriented development RFP out on the streets within this fiscal year. So that's why that's up there. Escondido is part of this because it's part of our zero emission bus project, and that facilities upgrades. It includes a reconfiguration of actually both parcels. One parcel that it supports the transit operations piece. The second parcel that's right now is a transit center, based upon the fact that it is likely, in order to support the future conversion to full 100% zero emission bus, that we're going to have to acquire, we're going to have to utilize more of that property. We also wanted to see what pieces of that property would be available for development as part of that. That's why those three were identified. Carlsbad, we have had historic discussions with your city relative to the transit-oriented development project. In prior years, we have sort of not advanced something because of the desire of the city at one point to get the plan adopted. And then the second piece of it was the trenching study and understanding what the trenching impact would be to the development of that site.
Sure, I understand. And I'm not looking just specifically for Carlsbad, but at the same time, trying to be mindful of the other North County cities as well. But I appreciate that feedback. And then the last piece that I had, and last couple of questions. One was in terms of climate change and other multimodal transit. I know we mentioned one specific piece on, I think it's on the next slide, about implementing zero emission bus technology projects. Is there anything else in our legislative agenda where we're looking at, and this is just me asking as a normal question, is there anything else that we can do to support any climate action plans that are going into effect in the different areas, and how are we as an agency looking at reducing those emissions?
So part of that goes towards our capital program and ultimately service levels that we operate. And so to some degree, if you go back to the list of projects.
Oh, sorry.
When we start talking about our railroad projects and even our bus projects, then always they're setting the stage for us to operate future service action in the future. So within our discretionary grant program, which is going to come to the board next month, one of the key things that we need is we need additional equipment to be able to operate the additional frequencies on coasters that were contemplated based upon the investments Sandak has been making. Right now, Sandak doesn't have the funds to provide us with two pieces of equipment. But those two pieces of equipment are critical because those to the midday service that we need to operate and the increased frequencies that you and I have received feedback from customers who want to have more service frequencies in the morning and PM. So that's how I believe we're doing it, through us having capital infrastructure and projects that are completed and implemented and procured that will support these cities' goals, along with obviously the development of our transit-oriented development projects, which I will also mention that within our TOD realm, one of the things that we're doing is we're seeking a grant to support a study of all of our, not all, of many of our Sprinter stations, towards repurposing those stations potentially to support those.
Okay, great. Yeah, and so I think just the last piece I want to make sure of is that we can make that we're actually leveraging and working with our other jurisdictions to make sure that we're continuing to hear that message up in Sacramento. So I think it's really we would look to you to make sure that you partner with all of us to get that word across, and especially for the funding piece of it. If we're looking to improve our infrastructure and our ridership, and obviously you and I just talked about it, working on trying to get people to get to where they need to be in a timely fashion. I think that's where hopefully you can utilize us to ride into Sacramento. I know we talked about that last meeting, but that's something that I am looking forward to, and I'm hoping we can do sooner rather than later.
What you said is great. So what I would propose in furtherance of helping us actually to take a meaningful step is we will work with the chair to get a letter to ask each city to identify a liaison that will work with us as part of a legislative committee to making sure that we can do as much cross-purpose work as possible, because I think that would be assistive towards other goals that we have.
And so that would be in addition to, I know that as legislation starts cranking up, we start getting letters, support letters, draft support letters that are looking for mayoral signatures. So this will be to augment that, or?
Yeah, that would be to augment that.
Okay.
So that's additive. And so what the chair is alluding to is what happens is as legislation gets mature, because a lot of the legislation we're seeing is not that mature, we will be coming back to the board to ask you to take formal positions on some pieces of the legislation. And there will be, in addition to legislation, as we move forward with certain discretionary grants, we're going to be asking you all for letters of support from your cities, from your mayors, to support the projects that we're advancing.
Any other questions, comments?
So thank you. SB 50, you said it came back again. And is this the housing by right measure? Is that my understanding?
That was SB 35. I think you're.
Yeah.
So there was
So what's this SB 50?
So SB 50 would require near major transit stops, and there's definitions of what that means. If there's a rail transit involved, or if there are bus headways that meet certain thresholds, that cities and counties can offer certain incentives to developers to develop housing. It also loosens some of the height requirements around those locations. So last year when Senator Wiener brought it forward as SB 827, he brought it forward. He started to make some changes. And I think if he'd been allowed to advance that bill last year, he probably would have had a lot of the opposition removed, because his intent was to make it workable so that cities and counties would be okay with sort of the direction he was going. There was a little bit of a personal issue between him and the chair of transportation that caused it to be killed in its first committee. So he's brought it back. Most of the opposition either came from big cities who have bus routes that change a lot, and how under this bill, wherever that bus route landed on any given day, the bill would apply to those routes. So he spent a lot of time working on a pretty detailed definition of bus headways, times of day, what those headways are, and where it would apply, to try to narrow it to just your major bus routes, to eliminate that opposition. The other side of it is the local control around those locations. And I think at this point, it's coming down to height. So it'll loosen up how high a building can go, like an apartment building near a transit stop. I think now in the bill, it's 4 to 5 stories, which could be in conflict with some local jurisdictions of what they would normally zone and allow.
Is it only height? Is it parking as well now, or?
So some of the incentives are, if you are putting in a housing development for particularly like affordable income individuals, and it's near the transit location, the local agency could actually waive your parking requirements. So there's some of those are the incentives for the developer to put the housing in by waiving parking.
Okay, so it's not okay.
It's a lengthy bill, and I could definitely share some more information. It had its first hearing in his own committee this week.
That's right. And you said he was the chair of the housing committee.
And he's chair of that, but
yeah,
next it goes to the Senate Transportation Committee. So it's definitely a bill that has a long road to go this year.
Okay.
But and the author himself is actually pretty amenable to changes. He doesn't want to see a lot of opposition. So I will get additional detailed information that can be shared. I think a lot of the cities and county will be talking about it as well.
Okay. He ran into a lot of opposition on 827 last year, but SB 50 is getting a lot of support, so it's much more likely to move forward. And it was up to 6 stories around a transit center. So in downtown Encinitas, 6 stories, as you can imagine, was pretty unpopular. It's now shorter, but still significantly more than we currently allow.
Okay, so but the height restrictions will be waived up to 4 stories, I guess. Well, anyway, it's still in progress. So keep us updated on that one.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Board Member Edson.
Thank you. So I will make a couple of comments on SB 50. My understanding is that it does remove local discretion. It doesn't allow council to grant extra favors for developers within those zones. It just basically gives them wholesale ability, as it's written now, to have countertop approval for, say, a 5-story building if you're within a half mile of a train station. And regardless of the location of that train station, well, we along the coastal corridor, which is what the coaster is in, also have a coastal act to deal with. So if we as cities on the coastal corridor allow for no parking required, and that's the other thing is I believe that with SB 50, there is 1 parking space per 2 units is the only requirement for developers. So these things are in conflict with the Coastal Act. So for our cities, for my city, to approve, to allow this to happen, we end up getting sued by the Coastal Commission, or, we're kind of in between the state and the Coastal Commission. So I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on this, and there have been some really good articles the last couple of weeks in LA. I think the tide is turning on this because there's a realization from an economic perspective that part of the Senator Wiener's approach or sales tactic on this bill was that a trickle-down effect. If we build more housing, there will be more affordable housing or more moderately affordable housing. And that's not the case. When the economists are looking at it, it's not the case. So I'd be happy to forward articles to anybody who'd like to see them, but LA Times has had a couple really good ones the last few weeks and whatnot.
And in my information back to the board, I'll make sure I focus on some of the Coastal Act concerns. And the board members' question earlier about additional lobbying. Anytime, particularly on this bill, when if you're in Sacramento as part of the League of Cities or something, it's his office is really good to go in and speak with, to outline if there are some concerns. So I would definitely take advantage of that opportunity. And if it's something we're doing here as part of the board, I'm happy to help, facilitate any of that. But getting in there and actually verbally saying, hey, here are some of the issues we still have, and walking through with the senator, I would definitely encourage that as well.
Yes, well, it's interesting that there's bus headways, but there aren't train headways. So he's treating every train station as something that's in the inner city in a very dense urban environment where there's a lot of frequency. We really don't have that frequency, and we won't have it for quite some time. So it's a little chicken egg problem of building high density when you really don't have that frequency for people to use that transit, and then you take away parking. So lots of problems with that one for me. But I actually wanted to ask a question about the AB 226 and AB 1543.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the ones you mentioned would require a fare paid pursuant to a reduced fare transit program to be counted as full adult fare for purposes of calculating any required ratios. So I'm assuming that this is a positive bill for us?
It does. It is, and it actually gets, so we have been focused kind of narrowly on LC Top because that was a program that through recent legislation could be used for transit fare subsidies. And it was one of the areas that NCTD particularly could use those funds within its service area. But when we got into the weeds of the fare box recovery ratio, we realized that the state funds can't be counted as customer revenue. So we were looking, I think, more focused at just LC Top, clarifying law and saying if the legislature's intent is for us to use these funds, then we should clarify that they can be considered customer revenue. This is just maybe the next stage up that you should just be able to consider these as adult fares, period.
And is there any funding that goes with this, unlike the Gonzalez Fletcher? No.
It's an accounting trick.
Okay, but it's a good accounting trick.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Let me have that a minute. Let me have that a minute. So the city of Solana Beach has one train station. Del Mar has none. Oceanside has 7. Maybe or maybe not, do we want all of this development in the transit station areas? Of course, we want something in the downtown because that goes every direction. But it's kind of like, be careful what you want. You want more transit, but you don't want to accommodate the transit. So I'm not sure whether I'm saying this tongue in cheek or for real, but I'm serious. I mean, we have 7 stations in Oceanside, so that's considerably different than somebody that doesn't want, and I'm willing to take around, especially our main one, I'm willing to take the 5 or 6 stories. And you know, I know there's going to be some parking involved with that, but we also have a lot of parking involved in the downtown already, so.
Well, and I think SB 50 also, because of its applicability to bus routes as well, Oceanside, you know, Vista, San Marcos, and Escondido especially are going to be, you know, subject to the provisions of that bill. With 827, there were some pretty useful use of GIS. So you could put in your zip code and it would show you through heat mapping what areas of your jurisdiction would be impacted by the legislation. And I do expect that to turn up for this bill as well. So any other questions or comments?
One last comment with regard to SB 50. Taking discretion away from local jurisdictions, from all of us and from our councils to be able to massage projects so they actually fit our cities and the development patterns that we're interested in having in our cities or that we've spent years in planning, doesn't mean that we're anti-development or that we're pro-development. It means that we ran to do a job. If our job is taken away and we aren't allowed to actually contribute and do what our residents want, then we're not doing our land use planning job because it's in Sacramento.
Okay, thanks.
I just want to say I wouldn't want the state managing anything that I'm in charge of.
And Board Member Bhat Patel, did you have some changes that you wanted to make to the legislative?
Not necessarily changes, but I'm sure you made note of the requests that I had. So I'd just love to hear feedback on that at a later date.
Yes, yeah, and I think primarily the open item, open item that you raised was really when is the next opportunity for review of this and for the cities to be able to provide input as we do that. And I think the starting point is first, let's create a legislative committee, and then we will make sure that that legislative committee towards the development of the calendar year 2021 has had input as part of that one that gets brought to the board for approval.
And what would be the timeline on that?
Well, I think probably it's typically good to start sooner rather than later. So I would say that we would want to get out of communication probably this month and start some of the meeting, because a lot of the carryover for what is happening now will carry over into the next legislative session. So it would make sense to begin that stuff sooner rather than later.
Great, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so this is a two-part agenda item. There's the receiving of the monthly intergovernmental affairs report, but we're also adopting the calendar year 2019 legislative agenda. So do I have a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
All right, so I have a motion by Board Member Edson and a second by Board Member McNamara. Desmond did it? Oh, you guys been ventriloquizing. Yeah.
I guess I have to vote on it now. Oh man, my little green hand there.
Got it.
Didn't work. A little. Okay. Long time for
On the motion of Board Member Joel Edson, second by Board Member Joel Edson, second by Board Member Jim Desmond to approve agenda item number 10. Motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item number 11, we are going to receive an update on the implementation of fare changes pursuant to Sandag Comprehensive Fare Ordinance. And it's going to be from Chief Financial Officer Park Lynch.
Good afternoon, members of the board. I'm here today to provide an update on the fare changes implementation. Fare changes were planned to take effect in April 2019, and there have been some hurdles along the way that I'll go through. But before I do that, I want to kind of give a brief background of the fare policy and what entails implementing a fare change across the region. So just to kind of get started, the San Diego Association of Governments Sandag Board Policy number 29, the regional fare policy, is the one who provides the regional framework for transit fares. All fare changes, including fare increases or changes in fare types, must be approved by the SANDAG Board of Directors or the Transportation Committee. MTS NCT can propose to amend the ordinance to adjust transit fares and collect, however, the ultimate decision relies with the SANDAG Board. Just to kind of give a quick background, this process started really back in 2017. And during the months of October and November last year, both NCTD and MTS held in total 6 public meetings throughout the region to collect feedback from our different customers. And just to kind of provide the background of why fare increases were necessary is because while our operation costs have increased over the past 10 years, it's obviously natural that there's inflation, there's consumer price index adjustments, that costs are naturally going to increase over a period of time. However, our fare revenues have declined, and it can be a combination of 2 factors. The first one is the decline in ridership, and the second one is that we have not really increased our fares over the course of over 10 years. We really needed both NCTD and MTS to increase our fare revenue so we could maintain high levels of service, and also for the purpose of simplifying the fare structure across the region. Back in December 2018, on December 20th, the NCTD Board of Directors approved the staff recommendation to affirm its support to SANDAG for the proposed changes to the Comprehensive Fare Ordinance. Since then, the SANDAG Transportation Committee, the Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee, and the Board of Directors consider the proposed changes on the following meeting dates. The Transportation Committee met and looked at the fare ordinance changes in January 4, 2019. The Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee held their meeting on January 9, 2019. The SANDAG Board of Directors had the first reading on January 25, 2019. And finally, the Board of Directors from SANDAG had the second reading and approved the fare changes on February 8, 2019. Just kind of that's just a quick background to explain how the process works for enacting fare changes in the region. This is also give you context of how our regional fare system is structured. NCTD and MTS, the Metropolitan Transit System, we share an electronic regional fare system that is proprietary of Cubic Transportation Systems. We both share the systems. Cubic Transportation is the owner of, it's a closed system. It's proprietary, meaning that it's really closed architecture. You really cannot make any changes to the system without the assistance from Cubic. MTS is the regional administrator of the system. They are responsible for maintaining and updating fare tables and configuring the system in collaboration with Cubic. The role from NCTD is that we maintain our own fare equipment, our ticket vending machines, our transit centers. However, we don't have access to system configuration. We don't have access to fare tables, and we don't have access to source data. Therefore, we cannot make any changes or configuration in the system. Those are led between MTS and Cubic. So the current update on where we are on the fare changes is that initially the plan was to have this take effect on April 1st, 2019. Since then, like I mentioned before, Cubic resources are needed to implement the comprehensive changes that were enacted. And based on the availability of the resources, the fare change is now delayed and is expected to be implemented in the summer of 2019. The effect for NCTD is that this delay will cause our NCTD budget for fiscal 2019 to be lower by $150,000 for the last 3 months of the year. When we looked at the proposed changes in the fare ordinance, we were forecasting additional revenues for the district between $1.5 and $2 million. We were very conservative when we developed our revised budget. We factor in potential risk, and had we budgeted the entire amount, we could probably have budgeted $600,000, but we were extremely conservative. So the effect on our budget is going to be a reduction of $150,000. So with that, any questions?
Board Member Drucker.
MTS wants to change the system out of Cubic. So could you talk a little bit about that for a second?
Yes. So MTS awarded, I think it was back in December, a contract to Init for open source fare collection system. We have informed MTS we intend to advance use of this new system within it, along with MTS, so there will be one regional fare system. We are in the process. We retained a consultant. The consultant is working with us to identify the specific elements that we need to support the implementation of the new fare system. It's intended that this new fare system be in place at the time that the Mid-Coast project opens up, and I believe in 2021, 2022 timeframe. And we are trying to work through to make sure we develop a specification that supports our operational needs, as well as giving us more access to information than what we have today. We also are working towards making sure that customers, whether they use Metrolink or Amtrak, that we can streamline the fare routing experience for those customers, i.e. today, if you were to go to a rail station, there's a Metrolink ticket vending machine, and then there's an NCTD ticket vending machine. We want to make it so that the customer can go to one ticket vending machine and purchase their ticket for travel. So that's kind of the high level. We will be coming back to you all with a more detailed presentation. As I stated, we have engaged a consultant who's working with us to develop the specific scope of work that we need in the independent cost estimate for what we will need to support the implementation of this new system.
I'm sure you're aware that Cubic has a investment in another company that has probably a pretty interesting fare system that would have all those capabilities. It would probably be less expensive and we would have more control over it. And I'm just wondering if the consultant could quickly look at that to determine whether or not that may make sense.
So one of the things that as we went through this fair process, while there was no formal action, it was pretty clearly communicated to NCTD that there was a focus to make sure that there was one regional fare system, that there would not be different fare systems. And so we stayed in the framework that at the end of the day, that we would be focused in on making sure we support our needs. I'm familiar with the company you're referring to, but our entire focus was that once MTS did a competitive procurement, that we would make sure that we would have a system, we would utilize the exact same system from a customer routing experience.
Do we know that MTS in their competitive procurement, that this other company had the opportunity and
everyone had opportunity to bid.
And do you know if they submitted anything?
I don't. Right. I don't know.
They are a North County company. They're located in Vista.
Any other comments or questions? All right, this is an informational item. I thank you for the information, and we're going to take the consent items that were pulled before we go into closed session. So hopping back to items
4 and 6.
4 and 6. Yes, please.
Okay, so basically I don't have a whole lot to say other than I absolutely support the move to ZEBS. But I have a question with regard to, there's something here, the third bullet down on agenda item number 4 says preparation of plans for phasing out current fueling infrastructure. So my question is there a backup plan? You know, if we have a huge earthquake and it cuts access to electricity, will the buses still run?
Well, so this is so what you just raised is a question as a comment that we as transit professionals have when the state is making a mandate, essentially pushing us towards one fuel type. That is just a risk that will come along with it. So as a matter of there being this mandate in place for 2040 that all purchases would be zero emission buses, there could become a point in time where the electrical grid network is down and there's not going to be ability for us to run a bus potentially unless we have sufficient generators that would be able to recharge those buses.
So I'm assuming by sufficient generators, it's like putting solar on all of our facilities
That's-
or bus charging
that's-
areas and having some battery storage that can accommodate.
Which could be, and that's part of what we're analyzing as part of this facility needs is what we would need to be able to support our operations.
Okay, thank you. And then on 6, why did I pull 6? This is what happens when you read really late
It
at
was
night. You're just
really
like,
good.
wow, I want to talk about this.
I
Um,
would move item 6 for approval.
About
4. It was 4.
Item 4
Well,
for
let's,
approval.
maybe we could take them together. Okay.
No,
No?
let's do one at a time.
4. Okay, item 4.
Second.
We got motion by Board Member Drucker and a second by Board Member Edson.
On the motion of Board Member Dave Druger. On the motion of Board Member Dave Druger, second by Board Member Joel Edson to approve agenda item number 4. Motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
On to 6? Through the chair? On to 6?
On to 6. yes.
Okay. So I was wondering if staff has discussed or determined the initial routes that would be best served by the ZEB pilot program.
That's part of the studies that we're going to do is to determine which routes we would start operating a zero emission bus on.
Okay, because I know earlier, Matt, you had mentioned Escondido was part of the ZEB project. Is that just because of the infrastructure?
Well, Escondido and Oceanside, because both of those bus facilities, east and west divisions, are both facilities that we will require upgrades in order to support electric vehicle technology.
Thank you. That was the only question I had, and I would move approval of 6.
All right, item 6, motion, Board Member Edson, second by Board Member Bott Patel.
On the motion of Board Member Joel Edson, second by Board Member Priya Patel to approve agenda item number 6. Motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Okay. All right, before we go into closed session, if we could skip to the item, board member comments and reports.
I just want, if we could publicly state here what is happening with the bus stop removal and how we had a delay. I think that's the biggest concern I'm hearing in Oceanside, other than local problems.
So I believe we've adjusted the date to April 21. And that is to make sure that we have the full 30 days for people to give us feedback on the proposed changes. And so that's why we made the adjustment. So it's still intending to move forward.
So they're also asking for notification, so they're not seeing anything out there that is other than if they're knowledgeable where to look.
I believe there's a press release that's already gone out relative to it, identifying all of the specific bus stops. What we can do is work with each of your cities, because we've already sent a breakdown to each of your cities for each of the bus stops, so that you, at your discretion, could post that on your city website as well.
Okay.
We do intend to place signs on each of those bus stops, so the public will know that this stop has been proposed for elimination. So they will know that from the actual physical bus stop out there on the street. They've already been posted.
Okay, thank you. With that, we will now take, oh, I'm sorry,
We're not going to come back to this, are we?
come back to comments.
Comments?
We can do it however you wish.
Okay, what, if we're not,
We are.
okay.
When we
we're
come out of closed session,
Okay,
I think we wanted to make that comment before we
Okay.
had the folks in the audience that left.
Okay.
If you think that it's
No.
important for everybody to hear, then we can take it. Okay.
So I think if we want to take various items on the agenda out of order, we should reorder them and have a vote.
Okay, I'll do
Thank
that
you.
next time. Sure. All right, so
Well, it seems like we still got 1 foot into comments, so I'd like to make one. If at the board or the Sandag retreat, there was an item that came up as part of the I don't know, was it the retreat or the last couple of meetings in Sandag there of Sandag taking, I guess, more than the TDA funds that they used to take. And then I understand that got changed or pulled out because they were going to take TDA funds from MTS and from NCTD. I understand from the executive director of Sandag that he was going to go back and talk to NCTD and MTS. And what I'd like to do is if there's any sort of a negotiation or any sort of recommendation with those TDA funds, that this board gets to vote on that before we agree to anything that goes forward to Sandag.
Okay, so we have pushed out the staff recommendation for the Sandag board meeting that pertains to that specific budget item. The long and short of it is that Sandag is no longer making a request of NCTD related to Transnet or TDA funds.
Okay, so that's just off the table now.
It's off the table. Just so you will know, they are working with MTS on a fund swap, and the fund swap is related to the 15 corridor and Transnet funds, but no fund swapping with NCTD.
Okay, I just want to make sure this board or this body votes on anything like that before it goes to.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so Lori Winfrey, NCTD General Counsel, will now take us into closed session.
Okay, thank you, Board Chair. I think before we do that, can I just ask that we, on the record, confirm the change to the agenda so that we can have it correct in the minutes? So we had, first of all, we had the 2 items, agenda items 4 and 6 were pulled from consent, and they were moved without opposition to the end of the informational item number 11. And subsequently, we heard some board member reports that were taken out of order prior to going into closed session. And my understanding is that when we return from closed session, you'd like to reopen the board member comments. Thank you. So with that, the board is now going to go into closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6, Public Employee Performance Evaluation, General Counsel. Returning from closed session with no reportable action, the item will be placed on the April agenda.
Okay, so moving on, we have no additional public communication.
No, sir.
Executive Director's report. Mr. Tucker, do you have anything to report? And here we are.
Go upstairs and work.
Back to board member reports, comments, and correspondence. Mr. Drucker.
Yeah, so the Transportation Committee of Sandag met on last Friday. Jack Feller was there. Jim Desmond is the chair, and Jewel Edson's also on it. So, and I attended as an alternate. We did talk about the Delmar. Yes,
Sitting
right.
next to you.
Right.
Sitting next to you.
Sitting close,
Yeah.
not next, but close. So we have a quorum there. Yeah, unfortunately, only Jewel and, well, we have three members. But we did talk about the Delmar Bluffs. And there is an engineer that has come up with a concept of trenching along the bluffs. And that will be presented to the Transportation Committee in about a month. So that will be interesting to look at. And then the other thing was the ITALC report. And the Sandag board is going to be looking at how to change the way the maintenance effort is calculated for NCTD and MTS along with the fare recovery, because we've not met those goals for years, and the way it's calculated is always going to probably get problematic. So as that comes up, the other members of the board for Sandag should be aware of that, so that they can make sure that it's changed properly.
Quick question on that. That's the 70-30 split, right? No?
That item is related to within the Transnet ordinance. There is a performance metric for the transit operators that our costs would be constrained within the San Diego area CPI. And that provision includes some exceptions that allows us to make a request for approval and to identify the specific reasons why our costs would have exceeded the CPI. And so this has been a normal standard practice that the transit agencies have to come in and make waivers or adjustments to that. And it's been discussed over the last few years, the need to revisit exactly this whole methodology for managing expense to see if there's a better way to come up with managing that performance.
Okay, because I remember you very early on when we talked about the 70-30, you said leave that.
The 70-30 split is relative to revenue sharing that
Right,
comes
leave
in
that
through the
one
federal.
alone?
Yes.
Okay, we don't want to touch that?
Yes.
Okay, so for those who are at Sandag, they did not talk, they did not talk about touching that, right? Okay. Good.
Any other comments? Yes, sir.
But I would just really encourage all people to take the time to do that. It's very worthwhile.
Excellent. And I attended the board retreat for Sandag, and we, as part of that retreat, also had an airport subcommittee meeting and discussed a few things about that particular project. And one of the things that did, I think, has been established is that between MTS and NCTD, we're going to get a shuttle from Old Town going to be able to take passengers from Old Town Transit Center to the airport. So I don't know exactly how that's going to shake out, but it's something that's coming. April 13th, the big tour of the Del Mar Bluffs, meeting at the Del Mar City Hall.
Powerhouse.
Oh, is it the Powerhouse now?
Mhm.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and so we're going to have, you received an email. It has some RSVP information in there through Evite, and that's a pretty important thing so we can get a head count. We're going to manage the groups in a way that avoids any issues with the Brown Act in the event there are multiple members of a particular jurisdiction there. So spread that news.
And wear comfortable shoes.
And wear comfortable shoes.
Comfortable shoes meaning they've got to have some really heavy duty soles. If you don't have heavy duty soles, you're going to be walking on flat shoes, but heavy duty soles because you're walking on
Ballast?
rocks,
Yeah.
ballast. Yeah, tennies, but well, my tennies don't have any support, so.
Okay, next meetings are the Executive Committee on April 4th at 9 a.m. The PAF meets on April 18th at 12 p.m. and the regular board meeting is on the 18th at 2 p.m. So this meeting is adjourned.